Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Getting In, a College Coach Conversation. Thrilled that you're joining us here as always. And I did want to make a plug, as I always do, for reviewing us on Apple Podcasts. If you find this show really helpful, it's helpful to us if you could leave us a review so that others can find the show. So if you have a few minutes today and you could do that, that'd be great. All right, we're going to cover a few different things today, including talking about the pros of working an on-campus job. And I'm also going to be doing a little brief riff on a listener Q&A. You know, we do these pretty frequently, but we're going to take a slightly different twist with those today. And I'm welcoming a colleague of mine for that. But before we get to that, I'm really excited to talk about small liberal arts colleges. I feel like people are, I don't want to say falling out of favor, because I certainly talk to plenty of students who have interest in the small liberal arts college, but I feel a little like they might be more and more misunderstood in this day and age. And so I'm particularly thrilled to welcome Dr. Sue Stuebner to the show. She's the president of Colby-Sawyer College, here in, I was going to say here in New Hampshire, but I'm not in New Hampshire, I'm in Maine, but here in New England. Sue, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining.
Beth, thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. So why don't we start out for our listeners who maybe are not as familiar, but can you tell us a little bit about Colby-Sawyer?
Absolutely, be happy to. So Colby-Sawyer is located in New London, New Hampshire. We are in what's called the Lake Sunapee, Dartmouth region of the state, just about 30 minutes northwest of Concord. We have been around since 1837. For many of our years, we were a 2-year junior college for women, and then evolved into a 4-year institution in the 60s. And in the late 80s, began coeducation. We are about 1,000 students, primarily undergraduate focused, but in the last couple of years, we have added some graduate programs. And we have a mix of more pre-professional majors, but still a very strong liberal education core, because we think that is really critical for our students' success. And so our students, are really involved in a lot of different ways. About 40% of our students are involved in athletics, and we are a Division III institution. We also have about 40% of our students are first in their family to attend college. And so graduation day is always a really special day for all families, but especially for our first-gen students, just for that amazing accomplishments. And we have a number of clubs and organizations outside of academics that our students get involved in. Just in terms of majors, nursing is our highest major in terms of number of students. Business, psychology, sports management, and I'm forgetting the fifth, but those are kind of our top majors here at the college.
Right, and notable for, as you mentioned, it's a strong combination of the pre-professional, because most of what you just mentioned are pre-professional in nature, but coupled with the liberal arts. So as a former English major, or as an English major, I guess I'm not former, I'm a huge proponent of the liberal arts. I think there's so much value in them. And I don't think we need to lose the liberal arts to exclusively focus on the professional. But, we would probably need an entire day and 5 podcasts to really dig into the ins and outs of all of that. But
absolutely,
so obviously you are the president of a small liberal arts college. And I was just curious about what you see as the benefits of small liberal arts colleges, just in general. Obviously, we can also talk a little bit more about Colby-Sawyer, the benefits for that. But, as you congregate and meet with other presidents of small liberal arts colleges, what are the things that really stand out to you?
Absolutely. And, I've really dedicated my 30 years in higher education to more regional private liberal arts colleges. And there's certainly liberal arts institutions that kind of run the whole gamut in terms of the ability of students that attend them. But I think one commonality that we all have is that students can really get a personalized education at our institutions. They will never be a number in a class. The faculty will get to know them individually and can actually help move them on a path, whether there's internships or some sort of senior project or thesis that is really designed specifically to their interests. As you just mentioned a moment ago, the critical nature of the liberal arts education, partnering with whatever you major in. At Colby-Sawyer, for example, our nurses are BS students rather than BSNs because we think it's so important that they not only get their professional training, but that they're able to communicate and problem solve and anticipate the future changes in their professions. So students from these institutions really get an opportunity to not only be ready for that first job, but also to be ready as their career unfolds because they have that liberal education foundation. And then the last thing that comes to mind is I think these institutions are incredibly transformative. Every place that I've been and at the national conferences where I meet with my peers, there is such tremendous growth between the first year and the senior year at these institutions. Our students are not only successful in the classroom, because of our size, they have many leadership opportunities across campus. And again, that personalized education, they grow in amazing ways. And so by the time they get to be seniors and commencement, they're ready to take on the world. So it's always a privilege to work with these kinds of institutions.
The thing that I was thinking as you were talking is places like Colby-Sawyer are places where students just aren't going to fall through the cracks, right? And
Absolutely.
where, you do have the resources because your student population is on the smaller side. You have the ability to say, hey, the professor to say, I noticed you weren't in class this morning because maybe there are only 10 kids in that class versus the 500 person lecture hall where you could easily not show up and literally not one person would know, except maybe your friend who knows that you're back home sleeping because you were out too late the night before or something like that, right? And
exactly.
If you're, and I love, and I think that 40% first gen is also a really good indicator that this is an environment where students are going to feel comfortable and where parents who maybe are less familiar with what this means to send their child off to college have a real comfort level. So I think for our listeners, you may not be first gen, but you may be saying to yourself, geez, I'm worried that I have a child who might get lost or who might not show up to that lecture at 9 a.m. on a Monday morning. And I love the idea of them being in an environment where people will notice. And, that's a good feeling. Not all kids are suited to going to a big school where they will be in some ways a number. And that can be fine, right? But it's not for every student.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, you hope that every student finds the best fit for them. And as you say, not every student is ready to navigate a really large institution. I have a funny story about the fact that you mentioned about professors and others noticing if you're not in class. When winter ends here and the sun comes out in the springtime, our students kind of flock to the quad. And one of our business professors actually saw one of her students lounging on the quad instead of being in her class. So she literally opened the window and yelled out his name and said, "Get in class, that's where you're supposed to be." And not every professor is that aggressive, but again, it's people know who you are by name, and mental health is an extraordinary issue that we're facing in colleges and universities today. We may not have the extensive professional resources that some of the bigger institutions do, but we do have a number of tools. And then just the small community, many times the students feel comfortable coming forward, or one of their peers feels comfortable coming forward and letting us know that they may be having some trouble, and we can connect them with the resources that they need.
Yeah, I mean, for all that there are schools out there with extensive professional resources, what we certainly are seeing is that those resources are stretched to their limits.
Yes.
And so while on paper it might look really impressive, the reality is that a really supportive community can be just as valuable, possibly more so, than a real huge professional community, because we've seen that can fail to support students. I mean, obviously it's a big crisis. Colleges everywhere are doing the best that they can, but I do love that point. And it is a great one, you know, not only is not every student ready to go and navigate a large institution, but even if they are ready for it, it may not be the best for them emotionally, or, you know, just from that perspective of going from a place, for some students, you're going from high school where maybe everybody knows your name to go to a huge college where nobody knows you can be really disconcerting. I know that I actually experienced that. I graduated with 64 students in my high school class, and then went on to a pretty big school where there were, 20,000 undergrads. And while
Wow.
I was okay, I was, fine with advocating for myself, there definitely was that feeling I had from time to time of just, nobody knows me here, and everybody knew me where I was. And so that's another student that I often think about when I think about small liberal arts colleges is, someone who really values their place in their current community and would like to establish something similar when they head off to college.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think, students at smaller institutions really have an opportunity to make an impact. I think actually everyone across our community, whether, you're on the facilities team, to our faculty, to even, our administrators, but especially our students as well, they can actually make really significant change in the college community. So if there isn't a club that's offered, they can very easily, gather a few friends and create one. Again, they can hold so many different leadership opportunities, which just help complement what they're learning in the classroom. And so I think it is a really wonderful atmosphere for a number of students. Some of our students, might have been overshadowed by an older sibling. Some went to really large institutions at high schools where, they just maybe couldn't get into that leadership opportunity that they wanted. And then I mentioned the first generation students who this is an entirely new landscape for them. And so that supportive environment from all the faculty and the entire community really matters.
Yeah, no, it's a great point, right? The flip side of that, where you coming from a place where maybe very few people know you and being able to make your mark when you end up in a smaller college. I love that point. We would be remiss if we didn't talk about what is always the elephant in the room when it comes to college, and that is cost.
Yeah.
And I do think that the perception is that small liberal arts colleges, private colleges, tend to be really expensive. And so I think many families write them off without ever taking a look. Colby-Sawyer has a really cool transparent tuition program, and I'd love for you to share a little bit more about that, and then just also about your thoughts on the cost of small liberal arts colleges in general.
Absolutely. And you're absolutely right, Beth. I think, a lot of families are dismissing private institutions solely based on the sticker price. In fact, Sallie Mae last year came out with a really comprehensive study that indicated that 80% of families and prospective students dismiss private institutions, again, solely based on their listed price, and don't go to the website, don't explore financial aid.
Yeah.
And so that's a really big segment of prospective students that we're not in conversation with, or many schools are not in conversation with. What many families don't know is that there is substantial merit and need-based financial aid at these institutions. And unfortunately, game is not the right word, but it's a model that's very confusing for families. We have these very high listed prices, and the actual amount a family will pay is significantly less because there's very large merit scholarships and then also need-based financial aid as well. And so based on the Sallie Mae study and our concern about reaching students, especially with fewer number of high school students in New England in the next 10 years, and also just, being concerned about kind of this gamemanship around high price and high discount. This past year, we did do what's called a tuition reset, where we lowered our tuition price from $46,000 to $17,500. And so the scholarship that students receive has gone down from about $30,000 to about $8,000. But we want students and families to know right from the beginning that they're going to pay less. And that, again, because we have such a large first generation population that may not know what questions to ask.
Yeah.
We want them to know it's affordable to come to Colby-Sawyer and, very comparable to many of the public institutions in our state.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a great price, and it's nice to know it up front. We spend
Absolutely.
a lot of time on this podcast talking about exactly that and looking into merit options and not looking at the sticker price and digging in and doing, the calculators on the different schools' websites and things like that. But if you're not listening to this podcast and you don't get a ton of support in your high school, or maybe there is a lot of info, but it's tough for you to piece through it all, the easy thing is to just say, well, you can always just go to UMass Boston, or you can go to UMass Dartmouth, or you can go to, UMass, the flagship in Amherst, right?
Yes.
And not looking any further. Same with New Hampshire. You've got a great state institution, but it's bigger, and it's not going to be for every student. So I love that you guys have done this. I, of course, would love it if more colleges would do that. I would tell you that the finance experts on my staff would also love it, even though it might threaten the need for what they do. Anything that makes things more transparent is great and helpful to everyone. So
Absolutely.
yeah, I appreciate you joining the call today, or the podcast today, Sue. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Okay, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to do a little bit of a twist on our listener Q&A, so don't go away.